Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper Podcast. Coming right up, fresh tips and insights from lodging professionals aimed at helping you improve your business. Our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, the digital concierge that helps your guests to live like locals. Learn how at frictionlessguest.com.
Steve Short, how are you doing today, my friend?
Matthew Langen, I am doing well.
Awesome. Well, it's great to be back. We have an interview here, which is kind of different. I don't think we've ever spoken to an innkeeper about the process that they went through in acquiring, owning, running, and then ultimately selling a property, which is the case for this interview with Marty Etzel, who's the former owner of the Flag House Inn in Annapolis, Maryland.
Yeah. So Marty comes to us with, I guess, a whole unique set of experiences, skills, all of that coming from the corporate world. So very businesslike in terms of his approach. And he and his wife, Carmel, who purchased the Flag House Inn, ran it for about 5 years, sold it, very, very businesslike, but also very much a focus on the guest experience as well, knowing that that's a core part of the business. So came into things not knowing much at all, but having a business slant and a business perspective on it. Got heavily into what makes innkeeping successful, what makes a property successful, analytics wise, as well as hands-on wise in terms of guests. And all of it turned out to be a great success. And now he's kind of leveraging what he learned there with Acorn. So yeah, pretty cool story and a lot of insights, I think, for current innkeepers especially. So hopefully that'll help some people out there.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely like a 360-degree approach story, if you will, which was really, really fantastic. And with that, we hope you enjoyed this Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview with Marty Etzel, who's the former owner of the Flag House Inn in Annapolis, Maryland. And Marty and Steve, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, awesome, Marty. Great to have you. Steve Short, how you doing, my friend?
Good, Matthew. Right, Matthew? Yes, Matt. Right. Everything's good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my mother calls me still. Yes, Matthew. That is correct.
I'm old enough to be your mother, probably. But
yeah. Not too close there. But yeah, great to have you both, Marty. Really appreciate the time today. Let's go ahead and just kick it off. Would love to hear more about your background overall and really your story about how you became an innkeeper.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so we didn't have a dream to own a bed and breakfast. It kind of happened by accident almost. So my background, I worked in the corporate world for a little over 35 years, undergrad in accounting, MBA in marketing, worked in a large chemical conglomerate for 23 years. Got lucky enough to live in England for 3 years, which was a neat experience. And they kind of eventually fizzled and I got a package to leave, and it turned out it was the best thing that ever happened in my career. And it was very scary having to go look for a job and network and all that after 23 years with the same company right out of college. And I did an interim for less than a year at a utility in kind of a field marketing role for lead generation. But I'd gotten to know SAP, which is the largest business software company in the world. When I worked at the chemical company, I implemented several SAP projects. I was a reference speaker for them describing what we had done. We did some pretty neat stuff in the early 2000s doing an online ordering system, which 20 years ago, that was pretty novel. And eventually I did get into SAP, and it was the best thing that ever happened into my career. I loved working in tech. I did what was called positioning and messaging. So you're basically giving the script to the salesman that they use with the customer. We offered them insights about the industries and line of business roles. And I loved working at SAP. However, getting into my late 50s or so, I knew that I wouldn't last long. And in parallel, my wife, who worked in the Baltimore County school system, we lived in Towson, Maryland, just north of Baltimore at the time. She was getting increasingly burned out in her job as a speech pathologist. She loved working with the kids, but the paperwork and caseload were crushing. And for a couple of years I hate my job. I hate my job. I said, well, I like my job. So in 2017, though, we said, let's figure out what we're going to do next. We're too young to retire. And we considered a couple of options. One was just fixing up houses and either selling them or renting them. And we discovered pretty quickly that too many other people watch too many HGTV shows, and getting inventory was very difficult. And then we had two friends that owned bed and breakfast, one in Maine and one in Vermont. And they're posting these pictures. Oh, today I went skiing and today I went sailing. We're like, well, this doesn't sound like all work. And this is usually where everybody just telling this other bed and breakfast owners, they just start laughing. But I would say it wasn't all work. So we started looking around. We found a place on the Eastern Shore of Maryland that looked interesting, but it was a 70-seat restaurant. The husband was a bit of a BSer, and we were a little daunted by a 70-seat restaurant, which we didn't really want to do. And the rooms were kind of tired. So at that point, one of my famous taglines the first time I invoked was, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I Googled consultants to buy a bed and breakfast. And we found Scott in Maryland, Bushnell. And we had some conversations. Scott's like, you don't want that place. I said, yeah, I don't think I want it either. He goes, well, I got some other places. He goes, well, how about Lancaster? I'm like, nah. How about Gettysburg? How about downtown Philly? 73% occupancy, which is a good number, of course. I'm like, I'm from Baltimore, I'm not from Philly. He goes, how about Annapolis? I'm like, talk to me about Annapolis. And from the time that I saw the financials, looked at the pictures, looked at the location, looked at the reviews, I'm like, this is it. I knew it was it. My wife Carmel wasn't so convinced, and she thought it was another one of my crazy ideas. To bring it forward, we took our offer. We found out it had been for sale for as long as 4 or 5 years, and it was a real undermanaged gem. And my wife still didn't believe it. We're at the settlement table, and she's like, so we're really moving to Annapolis. I'm like, yes. What do you think we've been doing the last 5 months? So we didn't take any how to be an innkeeper courses. We didn't even watch the Hallmark movies, although we did do a lot of practicing on cooking. We had some maintenance skills. We had some, host the family get-together skills. So we had a lot of the components. So I would call it kind of a naive optimism of taking over.
Yeah, that is probably unusual. But then again, you're coming from the business side of life. It's not like, it wasn't like you jumped at the first thing and said, oh, I just want to be an innkeeper. Let's just go out and buy a place because it looks cool or whatever, right? You were go into a little bit why it was kind of the gem. In terms of numbers, basically, right, you got great location. Maybe it needs to be fixed up a bit, but, good bones or whatever of the house, great, right. Good feel, then occupancy numbers and that sort of thing as well, right? A lot of potential there, right?
Yeah, good comments. Good question, Steve. So, and also, too, we had looked at a first place that was kind of at the top of the Chesapeake Bay, and we're like, no, this is not a good location. And in hindsight, the place in the Eastern Shore would have been a little more seasonal, a little more lonely, whereas Annapolis, and to your questions, the location it was right across the street from the entrance to the Naval Academy, and it was a block and a half to City Dock, which, if you're familiar with Annapolis, City Dock is like ground zero for the town. So it had a great location. It was a 71-year-old couple. They had done it for 21 years. They waited too long to sell. It didn't have the doilies and figurines all over the place, but at the same time, it needed kind of a kick in the butt. There was a bit of deferred maintenance between the kitchen. We walked in, looked at the kitchen. So visualize sheet vinyl, oak cabinets, and Formica countertops. So it screamed 80s.
I was going to say 70s, but yeah.
Yeah.
Either one. Pick your
one.
When
it was remodeled, but so we walked in, we're like, okay, well, that's $70,000 off the top because we had remodeled a couple of kitchens. We weren't daunted with knowing it needed some investment. And so fast forward, the first 4 months, I ran it on my own. I resigned SAP. I made sure I got my annual bonus, which in tech is a big deal. I was out pretty fast and we took over. Actually, back to pre-settlement, we had done some due diligence. Marilyn and Scott are like, well, Acorn Marketing hosts the site. You should talk to them. And in parallel, I also said, so give me the reservation system. It was hideous. The owners, they sent an attached Excel as an attachment as the confirmation. So I'm like yelling at my wife driving home. It's like, we got to fix this. So we held a beauty contest, kind of like a 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 3 different vendors. It was pretty clear at the end of that we wanted to use Think Reservations. Scott and Marilyn said you should talk to Acorn. They host the site, but don't do much else. The first words out of Lisa Kolb's, the owner's mouth, was, I want to make you an example of how to turn around a property that has a lot of potential. We're like, keep talking, Lisa. So we knew again, back to we didn't know what we didn't know. And both of those were fantastic. We got Think configured and stood up live 10 days after settlement. So we settled on February 2nd and Think was running on February 12th. So they were great. And likewise with Acorn, we slowly grew the relationship. The first 4 months, I was starting to say I ran it on my own because my wife had to finish out the school year. Looking back, that was crazy because we hadn't sold our house, our previous home. We had to prep it to get it on the market. We put it on the market 2 months after the settlement of the B&B, and we were shuttling back and forth, slowly moving things out or getting rid of them, whatever. And when you live in a house for 25 years, you accumulate a lot of stuff. You just keep excavating stuff out of the basement. So the first 4 months was kind of solo. Then my wife came down. The first 3 months were awkward, and she would acknowledge this too, because previously it's like we were roommates and we lived in the same house, and she did her thing in one room. I did my thing in another room, and we had dates on the weekends. And learning to work together elbow to elbow was a serious, significant change. We figured it out. There was a little bit of conflict. And I would say to any prospective innkeepers, listen to this. You need to really have an open conversation with your spouse or partner. And it really increased our levels of communication and openness. And we figured it all out. So February, we bought. Beginning of July, she moved in. We made it through the 2 boat shows, which in Annapolis is a major, major event. It's the crazy 2 weeks. We sailed through the boat show with a lot of veteran stayers that had stayed in the past, and they loved what we did. We were continuing to get great reviews from the very beginning. And so by the time we got to October, it's like, hey, we can do this. Whereas the first couple of months, it was like, wow, I hope we made the right decision here. So it got better from there. The first 2 years in 18 and 19, we grew the revenue about 50%. We really focused on the guest experience. We ran it like a business and we approached it like a business. We didn't get overly emotionally attached. And I would kind of caution, again, new owners or even existing owners to not get overly emotionally attached. It's a business. Yes, it's your home, but it's also a business. But we ran it, we did everything through the lens of the customer. So like what's right for the customer, even if it inconveniences us a little bit, is this the right thing for the customer? And so we continued to get great reviews. We grew the revenue, we grew the volume. We were a little soft on price, I would admit. During that time, we got a lot of feedback from Acorn, specifically my advisor, Will. The first 6 months, he probably thought I was not serious because we were still running all around the place, getting the business set up and getting moved out of our house. And it's kind of like, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. And I didn't fully understand everything, but I liked the flow of the numbers and getting some, you need to do this. You need to tweak TripAdvisor to do that. Think about doing this. So they really helped. And he was patient with me, but still had a lot of action items. So didn't fully understand everything that I needed to do, but I liked getting the numbers and having another person holding my hand. Then COVID hit. So we had worked pretty hard the first 2 years on renovations. We've renovated that kitchen. We put a new coating on the roof. I think we replaced one of the HVACs. We knew both of the hot water heaters needed to be replaced. We cleaned out a space in the back for extending the parking. It was pretty tight. We had parking, which in Annapolis is huge to have parking on site. We had a room over the garage that we converted into the loft. There was a few hiccups on my part and a few nosy neighbors that thought we were doing something that we weren't. But we eventually got that 6th room approved by the city as well. And that's adding 20% capacity, going from 5 rooms to 6 rooms. So it gave us more flexibility as well. So we were getting a lot of the right components in place. When COVID hit, that was traditionally the low cash flow point of the year, cash balance point of the year, because not all the reservations would start coming in by end of February. So we were in a little bit of a pickle with getting waves and waves of cancellations and not really having a ton of money to refund. And we have figured it out. We never had to put another dollar into the business. Grants and loans, particularly the grants from PPP and the county with the trickle down federal money, helped a lot. The business eventually picked up. And during that downtime, we did a few more renovations. I did learn to get into the data a lot more then during the 7 weeks we were closed, and then like the 2 months ramp up in May and June that were slow. And I had a better understanding of what the data was telling me and what the numbers were telling me in Google Analytics and elsewhere. So I became more of a data junkie. So we did good enough in 20, but we really were reset back to the baseline of the previous owners. And then things really took off in 21 and 22. 21, and people just kept coming. As soon as the vaccines became available in February 21, it was just crazy. The reservations coming in and the occupancy. We totally reconfigured how we operated inside the house because of COVID. Some things we kept going, like 2 seatings for breakfast. In the past, we said, come down anytime, 8:30 to 9:30, but we didn't know when people would come down. Right. And instead, we went to 2 seatings, which we would have kept that going, if we were still running today. So, but there was other things that were just a lot of extra work, and a lot of the things we kept in place. We went to lighter weight bedspreads that we washed after every guest. So when you can look a guest in the eye and say, everything on the bed's been laundered, that kind of reduces the anxiety level. So we made it through 21, and 22 was taken off like a rocket as well. So we were probably living off of the business the last 15 or 18 months. Whereas at the beginning, we were just putting all the cash flow back in the business. I think I'll stop for a second and catch my breath.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So give us some perspective on some key indicators, some key numbers like occupancy rates. Like when you took over, I think you were in like the 30s, weren't you, in terms of occupancy? And talk about, you talk about how you kind of grew things, but give everybody a perspective on how much you grew things and yep. How effective this was, right?
Yeah. So, and that's, again, like I was saying, my undergrad was accounting. So I was a numbers person from the beginning, and I kind of looked at the numbers a bit, and I kept a spreadsheet for doing a financial forecast. So number one, I would say to any owner, be sure you do a budget for the year, and a profit and loss budget and a capital investments budget. And then that results in your cash flow budget. And it's going to change. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to have better months. You're going to have worse months. But you then know what you can afford and what your target should be for occupancy, what it should be for price, what it should be for profit, what it should be for spending. And, sometimes the great unpredictable number, what you need for repairs and maintenance. And in terms of the numbers itself, yes, we started somewhere in the mid 30s for occupancy, something like 600 or 700 nights a year. We, like I said earlier, we grew at 50% the first 2 years, which was solid for revenue, but I knew we were being a little weak on price because we wanted to increase heads on beds. We wanted to increase reviews. And then we knew over time we could increase prices as we had a better reputation, to the point where we'd get feedbacks from guests of, I looked at your reviews in TripAdvisor and Google. I knew I didn't want to stay anywhere else. We're like, okay, this is paying off. And then we grew it to the low 70s. So our trailing 12 months before we left, and I'm giving you these numbers on 365 days numbers. We tracked when we had rooms blocked or we took vacation. I'll come back to vacation in a bit because that's super important. But we were probably open 95% of the available calendar days of bookable rooms. But we got into the low 70s. 3 of the last 9 months, we were at 90% occupancy, which is a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
But having said that, again, back to the learning to work together. If we had occupancy like that the first year, we would have had a meltdown. But right. Because we learned how to work together, because we figured out little efficiencies as we went along, we got a lot more specialized. We didn't yell at each other, stay in your lane, but we knew the lanes that we needed to be in. And lastly, we had amazing housekeeping help. We had 3 different generations of cleaners. They were all great. 2 out of the 3 were ultra reliable. All 3 gave super good quality. Another thing, during COVID, we started putting tip envelopes in the rooms. We gave that 100. We got some tips previously from nice people that just leave a couple of bucks on the counter, on the table. But we put the tip envelopes in there, and we gave that 100% to the cleaners. We paid them well. We treated them well. We had fun with them. We paid them a bonus every 2 months or so. And we'd say, like, look at this review we just got, or we've been super busy. We wanted to show our appreciation. Sometimes it was cash. Sometimes it was a gift certificate. when we got approved for select registry, we didn't stage the room for the inspector. We just let the inspector experience the room like any other guest. And her comments were, I didn't find 9 of the 10 things I normally find wrong with a room. So we gave both of the cleaners like a $200 bonus on the spot. We're like, you guys are amazing, because we were pretty sure they were doing a good job. And we didn't have the complexities of an innkeeper and a cook because we did all that ourselves. We checked the guests in. I stripped the rooms and prepped them. Carmel did the laundry. So we did a lot of the work ourselves. And I know it gets more complex with a bigger operation. And we always hear the staffing, but really, and I know a lot of people do this, but really appreciate your staff and don't worry about a couple extra bucks to pay because they're your most critical linchpin to your success, because things can really go off track when you're short staffed or somebody doesn't show up or doesn't do a good job. So I can't say that enough. Other numbers, Steve, I mean, we tracked reviews. We would get 20 to 30 reviews a month on 6 rooms, which was pretty dang good for like a 4.95. I said earlier, we lived off the business for the last 15 months. So we had some really good numbers and we knew that we would get paid at the end, so to speak, that we weren't driving this to like skim money. And we actually, and that's another big thing you hear when people are trying to sell a place versus when they're running the place and they take all these crazy deductions or can take all these crazy deductions and they're not showing much of a profit. Whereas you got to show a decent profit when you're getting ready to sell. And you should always be thinking about selling. From the first day you buy the place, you need to think about what your exit strategy is. Even if you don't know when that date is, you always want to be positioning yourself that once you decide to sell, that you're not playing 3 years of catch up. Yeah. So we didn't do some of the crazy things. Not that I loved paying income tax, which I hated paying income tax, like we all do. But at the same time, I didn't do a bunch of crazy deductions. So we showed a pretty good set of growth in the P&L, almost to the point where some of the realtors were saying, so what's left? Where's the growth for the new owner? I'm like, you're getting a great annuity. So we didn't price it to the sky based upon your metrics. So if somebody takes it over, if they can run it and get the same cash flow, they're getting a good deal. So, yeah.
Talk a little bit more about, and then we can segue into what you're doing with Acorn, but talk about Acorn's role in your success. And because I assume that they were a pretty big part of that, or at least, there along the way. And that, I think that's what kind of forged your relationship with them as to why it felt right to kind of get into working with them now, right?
Yeah, they were a huge part. And I'll come around to that in a second. 1 or 2 other things I want to say with focusing on the guest experience. We kept figuring out little things that made the guest experience easier. And I'm going to cover 2 things, texting and pre-arrival communications. I figured out, just like anybody else, that people respond to guests because we'd call people like, hey, we didn't get your information since you booked on Expedia. Like, when are you going to get here? And what's your second person's name? And do you have any diet restrictions? Never answered phone calls, never answered emails. But they would answer texts because I started texting guests right out of my phone. So I got to the point where I had a pre-formatted Word doc and I would paste that into a text that I manually was texting, and then I would send it out. And I was amazed at the response. I said, this is worth the extra work. So then once Acorn brought Whistle to us, I'm like, sign me up. I want to be the first one. And that was huge. And now certainly there's other texting options. I believe Think has their own. I know Think has a very good option as well. So look for these efficiencies to communicate with the guests. And the texting was huge. Then the second one was pre-arrival information. And during COVID, people would call us, hey, are you open? Yes. What are you doing to keep me clean? What are you doing to stay clean? Well, we live here too, just like you will be. Oh, okay. What's there to do? I'll send you a mail. And then I realized, I said, I'm repeating myself all the time. I'm typing the same crap over and over. And I need to streamline this. So I figured out how to build a pre-formatted mail in Think with a ton of hyperlinks for what's to do. I had a winter version and a summer version, and we set it up so that it went out a week ahead. The big sailboat outing that sells out pretty fast, you can start booking it 6 days ahead. So we sent it 1 day before the sailboat bookings would start for the week. And guests love that because, the worst thing you want to do is to have a guest say, we recommend you go to Boatyard, Carroll's Creek, and Osteria. And they're like, I just called them all and they're sold out this weekend. I'm like, shit. So we learned too. So the guests that were on it, they're like, this is great. I booked those restaurants. I'm so happy that, we're going to have a great weekend. So they were thankful for that. So that's the other thing too, and you can do that in your product as well. I know with Frictionless, where you can build those things and refer people. We had built an extensive things to do page that I kept tweaking it. And we uprate and downrate attractions based upon what the guests told us and our own experiences. We didn't exclude anybody, but we did a blog on restaurants. So people would have a little more detail. We had like 20 or 30 places in town, which were just about all were walkable to where we were. So those were some of the other things we focused on the guest experience. How did Acorn help us? So they really said that they were big on education and they would have several webcasts per month. Probably at the beginning, I attended very few of them or multitasked frequently during them because I was, again, just trying to keep paddling hard and keep our head above water, particularly with all the improvements. And same with the monthly calls with the advisor, and they'd send me the numbers. Over time, it was slowly sinking in. And during COVID, Acorn did a tremendous job with what's the status of everybody getting PPP. Here's some things you should be doing while you're having downtime. It's not going to be like this forever. They're kind of propping us up, which was good because there was about 2 months where my wife, where Carmel would run out of the room every time the phone rang because it was probably another cancellation. And she stayed away from me from 2 hours after every call. So I learned a lot more than about the flow of information into Google Analytics, the different options in TripAdvisor and how they flowed through. The Google hotel ads became much more accessible within Think, understood a lot more how to manage with the OTAs. So it was kind of like putting together and implementing all the things that I was getting talked at. Again, it's like you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And it was all kind of sinking in. So I would also console the first years 1 through 2 or 3 owners to say, I know it sounds like a lot of gobbledygook speak. I know it might sound really confusing. Take your time, ask questions, and experiment. So it's hard to have like a disastrous decision. So don't be afraid to experiment with price, and don't be afraid to experiment with different communications, different, etc. Boosting posts on Instagram and Facebook and so on. Get help where you know you need help. And that's another big too, is know what you should be doing yourself and know what you should outsource and have others help you with, both on budget and time and complexity.
And Acorn
so along
does
the
that,
way, Acorn really helped.
Don't they kind of offer sort of different levels of, here's how, if you're more hands-on, you want to do more stuff yourself, that's a certain price or whatever, versus if you want us to do more for you?
Exactly. And several of the other most of the marketing companies in this industry will do that too. Acorn has kind of 5 levels of service. 1 and 2 is kind of just maintenance mode. You get access to the education. Then you step it up 1 level where you get the analytics and the data presented to you about where the revenue was coming from. And you drop in your costs against that. You can see the returns. The next step up would be writing content. And the next step up from that would be closer to what you would call revenue management, where they're doing a lot more of the operations for you, all with appropriate pricing, of course. My experience working in tech and working in marketing might sound a little arrogant to say, but nobody can write it better than I can write it because I know what I'm writing about. Other people were like, nope, I'm too busy, or I'm not good at writing, or I don't have time for it, and I've got budget for it. And again, the bigger operations can and should do it, because once you get above 8, 10, 12, 14 rooms, there's only so much you can do in the day, and your whole span of control really changes. So to answer your question, yeah, there's different flavors or different levels of service. In our case, we were only 6 rooms. We had a limit to what we could afford, versus I kind of like to put my creative flair on things. Having said that, we did 2 photo shoots, 1 at the beginning, 1 towards the end. The second one was spectacular. It was worth every penny of what we paid Beth Campbell. She did a tremendous job. And there's 2 or 3 other good operators as well. But Beth was kind of the right fit when we interviewed each of them. And particularly with room photos, food photos, you can probably DIY it, particularly if you get a light box and really have fun with plating, which we did with plating and making it all look popped on the plate. So Acorn really helped with a ton of things along the way. It helped that I was a skier and we went out to Colorado. I had in the past, the winter was my busiest season in tech, and now it was my least busy. So we went to Colorado and skied. Lisa and Mark lived out that way. We get together for lunch or dinner and kind of a deeper relationship, to the point where they would start pinging me with questions. I'm like, why are you calling me? I'm like a 6-room place. But my background in the professional world kind of gave different approach to things. I know there's a lot of second career people. So some of those skills of having a process, understanding the analytics, asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of listening, all those things translated over. So as we were getting, now I'll turn the corner now to the world now a little bit, probably on like the last trip in 22, she's like, you're for sale. Yes. What are you going to do next? I don't know, but I'll be trying not to drive my wife crazy.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So it kind of planted the seed with both of us about a potential going forward.
So, and what did that turn into as far as what you're doing now?
And then the selling part too, I'll touch on the decision to sell and how that went down. So towards the end of 21, we're just having a spectacular year. I'm like, wow, this is kind of like a good, everything you read is you want to have a show increasing revenue and that you're showing growth. We had a huge dip in 20. We had a great recovery in 21. 22 was starting off to look really good as well. So we had been told that, figure on 1 to 2 years to sell. We had privately told each other, this is a 5 to 7 year project. Let's not wait too long to sell. Let's not wait till we're 71 and still then getting desperate to sell like the last owners. So we kind of directionally would have rather sold sooner rather than later. So we decided to give it a shot. We went on the market in February at the ALP conference, approached a lot of the brokers, said, hey, we'll pay you 3%. We want to list this ourselves. We listed on all the free to list sites. And we got approached pretty quickly by somebody in town. We also had 2 or 3 or 4 other interested parties that came through, and it didn't work out for various reasons that I won't go into, but there was some pretty solid interest as well. But a local operator in town, some Naval Academy grads, they had owned a place around the corner, fixed it up beautifully. They kind of knocked on the door and said, we want to buy you. I'm like, okay. They said, we had some other transactions we got to clean up first, but we'll be back. And they were, but there was kind of a 2 or 3 month interim that we were still entertaining offers. But they did come back with an offer. We got to the point where the price was good enough. We sold direct, like I kind of hinted at. We decided not to list with a broker at the beginning and wanted to try to sell it ourselves because we thought we had a pretty good opportunity. And we didn't want to be tied down to one broker or one realtor as well. So they came to us and with a letter of intent, and they said, we want to work direct. And I said, that's fine. I've sold direct before, and I have a good settlement attorney I've used 3 times before that I have great confidence in, including he is who we used when we bought. So we knew the docs that you needed with a bed and breakfast that are a little bit different, and setting up an LLC and selling an LLC and all that. So we saved like $100,000 in realtor fees, and it's not for everybody. There's a lot of good quality realtors out there, including Maryland. In our case, if it had dragged out in 6 or 8 months, we absolutely would have listed with brokers, both locally and nationally. So we got from listing on the market in February to going to the settlement table July 22nd, and which is 5 months, which was pretty spectacular.
Very fast. Yeah. Yeah.
So we felt very lucky and blessed. And like I said, the price was good enough, allowing for the not paying the realtor fees, kind of the net take home from the table was within my walkaway. So I was happy with that. And we doubled our money, back to the numbers. We doubled our money from what we put in 4.5 years ago. So that was a pretty dang good return. It was the result of the hard work and attention to the customer focus and everything. So as we were on the track towards settlement, I again heard from Lisa, like, when are you selling? I said, when settlement? There's a couple of more weeks. We need to talk. So I needed kind of a 2 or 3 month recovery because we were sprinting to the finish line, being busy, moving everything out, not yet having a place to live in, lining up a furnished apartment to move into, shopping for a place in town. And we told ourselves we wouldn't be in a hurry. And one place that we really liked that we eventually got, the seller was kind of a reluctant seller. It was a second or third home. He had all the money he needed, so he wanted to do it on his terms and had some kind of unrealistic expectations. But we eventually got to settlement, but that was after we had sold and moved out of Flag House. So we needed 2 or 3 months of recovery time. And then Lisa just said, what do you think that you like to do, or describe what you're like? And then she came back and said, we've never had a sales role. I need help. Our business is growing. So I want you to handle working with customers. And it's really turned out great. I thought I increasingly was learning a lot about the industry, being the owner. You know a lot more when you're on the other side of the table, and you got to be an expert in talking to prospects. So there was a lot of training and conversation with Lisa and Mark and others. And then fast forward to where we're at now, it's been a very successful relationship. I love what I'm doing. I'm not working corporate hours, so to speak, where I can kind of set my own time. It leaves time for skiing. It leaves time for boating, which starts next week. But at the same time, I love working with customers. I love hearing what other properties are doing. It's been successful enough in terms of adding more clients for Acorn without any specifics. And so it's been a lot of fun. And when I sit back and say that I think back to 5 or 6 years ago, I was bored in a corporate job. I knew the end would come. I wanted to go out on my own terms, having been riffed once before, reduction in force. I had an unhappy wife. Fast forward, we came in, bought a business, ran it really well, sold it when we wanted to sell it. We're living in the house of our dreams overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm still having fun and staying busy. I feel very lucky and grateful and blessed.
That pretty much sums it up, Marty. And Matt, I didn't have to ask a whole lot of questions either. I mean, I had a feeling he'd be like the Energizer Bunny. You wind him up and let him go.
Yeah, totally. Lots of good stuff here.
Yeah. So anything else you want to talk about in terms of your role with Acorn? I mean, so it's working with existing clients, or it's really more finding new clients. Is that right?
It's finding new clients. Yeah. So there's a lot of cold calling or slightly warm leads. A lot of properties are aware of Acorn, some more than others, and others you're kind of starting from a cold start. And my observations now, so I've probably looked at over 100 properties before giving them a call. And again, in a lot of cases, cold calling or slightly warm calling. Nearly every property I've looked at has potential for improvement. I have kind of a checklist, or kind of both kind of mental in my head as well as kind of written down, things I look at to get an idea of the property. I usually have a decent idea of the property, depending upon what the owners put in their website and in their social posts. And reading the guest reviews probably is equally illuminating to know kind of where the property's at. I would say nearly every property has opportunities for improving their marketing presence, whether it's in how they approach all the different flavors of Google, all the different flavors of TripAdvisor, what they do or don't do with OTAs, how their website is set up. I have learned a lot of, technical stuff, the stuff you don't see with websites. I won't go into all the particular details. Some of the other marketing companies out there do a really nice job, very similar to what Acorn does. And I would say Acorn does as good or better in terms of managing all these different things against the checklist that we have. And I think it's a fairly unobjective checklist. It's not like tilted just of the things that Acorn does well. It's kind of a standard checklist that any good professional in the industry would do. But there are some firms that do a very good job. And there's other marketing companies that, how do I say this nicely? They're missing opportunities. I guess I'll just leave it at that in terms of how they could support their customers. So it really comes down to each customer. Back to my positioning and messaging days in the corporate world. What's the amount of pain that the customer's in? And usually you can find that out of, no, I'm very happy. I'm happy with what I'm doing. Our business is good enough, whatever. Okay, fine. We have these opportunities. And if you're interested, we can talk about them. But if you're happy, I'm not going to take up more of your time and take up my time. Other places are like almost like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this call. So it's like they're busy. They know they could be doing better in some of their areas of marketing. And we get to a transaction pretty fast. And there's everything in between where some places know that they can improve and it hasn't become a big enough pain yet, or they just have other projects that they're working on with, kind of the endless improvements and maintenance list. And at the same time, there's a lot of properties that recognize they don't have the expertise, or they may have some amount of interest in it, but they don't have the time for it. So it's either, I don't know this stuff and I need help with it, or I know what I need to do, but I don't have the time to do it. And that's probably the two categories. But like I said, I would say nearly every property that I've looked at, there are things that they could be doing better. And it's just a matter of degree of where they're at today, of how good or bad that they can be doing.
Excellent. Good deal. Matt, what do you think?
I think this has been pretty good. I think we covered off on a lot. Marty, we might be ready for the last question of anything else to add before
You never told me about the last question. Now I'm nervous.
No, we just don't like you to go out without a bang or whatever.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure we don't leave you hanging here. That's all.
Yeah. Any parting shots? Yeah. Final thoughts.
Oh, do I have any final shots? I would say to all the property owners out there, have fun with it. Step back. I mentioned vacation briefly. Be sure you schedule vacation and get off the property. We took 4 weeks vacation or 4 weeks off the property every year. Some of the times we shut down and some of the times we brought in sitters, but get away. I wouldn't even say recharge, but just get away and find some time. And I get this. We got this when we were the owners, and we get it even now. Like, oh my God, that must have been so much work. And my wife feared it too. That it would be like a ball and chain, like, oh, we'll never get away. So the first conference I went to, the first priority was find in-sitters. And we found 2 or 3 great ones all through and now I'll get in trouble for not remembering the name, the innkeeper's assistant. Now I can't remember the name, but there's a number of
There's interim innkeepers is one of them.
That's it. That's it. Thank you. Yeah. Sue Kalis was great. And there was a couple of other in-sitters we came in that were super great. And really, there's a lot of work to do with training. So we had to kind of force us to write down procedures. But back to the original thought of be sure you schedule time to get away. We'd find these little, Saturday afternoons. We loved Navy football games because it was a 3-day minimum. 6 rooms came in on Thursday, 6 rooms checked out on Sunday. So we had, we served breakfast on Friday and Saturday, give a quick check-in on the rooms. But noon on Friday and Saturday, we were done for the day. So that's a half a day off. We'd go out on the woodwind to go sailing. We'd take a little half a day trip or whatever. So find the little pockets of time off and utilize them as well. And we had a great set of neighbors on our street. We loved living downtown. We loved all the people we met. And that was a criteria for us, is to find a place that was in walking distance of downtown. And we did. We're within walking distance, but on the other side of the harbor. So I know it feels stressful. There is help out there if you need it. Establish a list of, we had big project plumbers and little project plumbers. We had big project construction guys and little project construction guys. So find the network of people to help out there. Make a list and keep prioritizing it as you learn and see things, and move that priority list around based upon what needs to be done. And just don't take the eyes off of giving customers a great experience. There's a private Facebook page that bed and breakfast owners, many of them probably know. Half of the people, they're just venting about their guests. And I know they do that kind of as a release mechanism. But some of the comments in there, it's like, are you really in the right business? You probably have waited too long to sell if the people are venting about some of the things that they're venting about. And some of them are a little unlucky with some of the guests they get in, but know why you're doing it, know how you want to get out. But hey, enjoy the ride.
Sounds good.
I should take us out on that one. That's a great ending comment there. Well, with that note, this concludes this Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview with Marty Etzel, who's the former owner of the Flag House Inn in Annapolis, Maryland, and he's now a sales and marketing consultant with Acorn Marketing. And as you heard, Marty was kind enough to share his insights around his successes as well as key learnings in owning, running, and ultimately selling the Flag House Inn and much more. And our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn how at frictionlessguest.com. And Marty and Steve, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Marty. We appreciate the time.
Yep. So long, everybody. Bye.